Okay, so let's get started. It's been delayed a bit, but yeah, now we are good to go. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Xiaoli Zhang as the speaker of today. She did her undergrad in psychology from Tsinghua University, where she worked with Dr. Mei Hong Zhang. She received her master's and PhD in psychology at WSU and she worked with Dr. Julie Golub. During her PhD, she studies the interaction between attention and visual perception. And now she is a postdoc in attention and cognition lab at George Washington University. And she is working with Sarah Shomstein. I had a few chances to listen to her talk while she was at WSU, and I always found that her research question is interesting, and I always impressed by the sophisticated methodologies she used to answer those questions. I'm so excited to hear her new work today. And today she'll tell us about how spatial certainty influences the task relevant object processing. Please join me and welcome Dr. Xiaoli Zhang.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm so happy to be here, although virtually. And thanks for the kind introduction. And today I am going to share an ongoing project. So we are still under data collection for this project, but I'm really happy to share the preliminary results and findings, and then hopefully can discuss that with the audience. And I'm happy to take questions during the presentation. If there's anything not clear or if there's any questions, feel free to chime in and ask. I don't know how it works with this format because I cannot really see the audience. So if you raise your hand, I cannot really see that, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I'd like to start introducing this project again with a real life example, as we always do with our presentations. So we are immersed in this environment or this world full of information, and just take visual information as an example. We receive visual information from all of our visual field with different dimensions like colors, features, say shapes, locations, and even higher level information all the time. And this information is so much that is definitely beyond our cognitive capacity. But we have this mechanism that's really powerful for filtering out and prioritize the information that we currently need to process. Say as an outcome of this mechanism, for this example in the fridge, as an outcome, our brain somehow decided to prioritize this part of the visual information. And the reason or the factor that leads to this outcome can be like so many factors getting involved. For example, the location of the item on the bottom shelf, the features, the color or the shape of this item, the identity, the object definition of this part of information, or higher level semantic relationships or semantic meanings for this, and even like related memory or some weird random reward for picking up, prioritizing this part of information. So these factors has been studied and has been shown in the field that these can drive a moderate attention to prioritize. And there are many more factors that are even harder to define or classify. For example, I was actually showing the same real life example here to a lab meeting, and then someone in my audience at that time, that is my PI, Sarah, pointed out directly and said that, how could you put fresh tomato in the fridge, like immediately after I showed the example? So I think that is a perfect example of showing some very unique and maybe specific factor for picking up this part of information, which I might call a personal preference, and she might call it a legal issue of putting tomatoes in the fridge. But this can show that there are so many factors from lower level to higher level that can get involved in this seemingly straightforward and fast attentional selection process. And putting these real life example into a theoretical model, then we are building, or our brain might be building a priority map of the space. And then on this priority map, we are putting weights for different locations, and those weights might take into factor of different components, say the spatial locations I've mentioned, objects, emotions, semantics, size, time, other stuff. The list just keeps going on. And as the field goes on, the field of attentional research goes on, people also find that there are more and more factors that's beyond like the very beginning of this, like the, well, not very big, but very traditional theory, like the dichotomy of top-down, bottom-up attention. And people find that, okay, these factors are far beyond the simple theories of the early age, that we actually need to consider more and more factors, and considering not only the factors by themselves, but more maybe complex, that the factors might interact with each other. And so for this specific project, for this specific presentation today, I cannot touch on all the factors here, of course, in this image. But I want to actually go back and focus on the two of the most studied topics or factors in the attentional field, and trying to see their interaction in a different point of view. And this is the spatial attention and object attention. So if you are studying attention, these two might be the first two of the among the first topics that you learn or you are familiar with in this field. And so bear with me that I'm going to bring up the old studies because they are so classic, and they basically set up the foundational findings for this field. So for space-based attention, we found that our attention can be allocated to specific space. And for this famous Posner cueing paradigm, if we give a cue either at the center of the screen, pointing either leftward or rightward, or a periphery cue, maybe just flashing earlier at left or right location, then we are able to allocate our attention to that specific location, and our subsequent performance at the cued location will be better, will be facilitated compared to the non-cued location. And this is the basic finding of Posner cueing paradigm, and this has been replicated so many times, and then strongly show that our attention can be flexibly and transiently allocated to a specific location in space. And by transiently, I mean that for a current trial, you might be allocating your attention to the left side. On the next trial, after 1 second, you are able to flexibly change to another location. So it's very fast, and it can be updated very quickly. And in contrast, another type of spatial location that's actually taking a statistics aggregated among the temporal domain, among the time, which might not be transient, but might be long-lasting, and then might be, you can call it a summary or a statistics along the time dimension. And one paradigm that's very perfectly capturing this type of attention is the spatial probability paradigm or statistical learning paradigm. So for this specific paradigm, participants are doing a visual search task. They will need to search a target among several distractors. And for the manipulation of the target location, the target might appear at a certain location more likely than the other locations. So there will be a spatial location with higher probability. And after a certain amount of time for participants to learn and pick up this probability, and they are able to allocate their attention, or their attention will be biased or allocated to this rich location. And this happens even if the probability later, like in the testing stage, is taken off of the manipulation, where all the locations will be equally likely. Participants might still prioritize this previously rich location for a certain amount of time. So this effect lingers. And this is a example showing how our attention to a specific spatial location can be aggregated a long time, and then also can linger across amount of time. So this means that our attention allocation is highly related with space, with spatial organizations. And on the other hand, another topic, object-based attention, highlights the effect of object or object boundaries for attention selection. And this will link back to the very classic very start of the beginning of the object attention field is from the Eagly driver referral paradigm in 1994. So in this paradigm, while participants were fixating at the center, they will see two rectangles on the screen, and those two rectangles act as two objects. And participants are giving a cue at one end of the rectangle. Sorry, very harder to see in this picture, but there is a thicker board on one end of the object. And depending on the location of the following target, which is the color square on one end of the rectangle, the target could appear in a valid location, which is the same location as the cue, or invalid location, which is a different location as the cue, but it could be on the same object as the cue or different object as the cue. And the basic finding for this object-based attention phenomenon is that when the target appear at the same object, participants' reaction time to this target was faster compared to a different object case. And this is indicating a same object benefit and indicating a potential mechanism for attention to highlight the whole object or part of the object with a gradient or something, but definitely prioritize the object compared to the other non-cued object. So this is the beginning of object-based attention, and people since then have been trying to replicate and trying to figure out the mechanisms of object-based attention in terms of like the boundary and whether that extends to real-world object or the time, the temporal dynamic of object-based attention, and all sorts of factors related to this. And one interesting topic in this object-based attention is that although many studies have been able to replicate this basic same object benefit, there are indeed some studies that fail to replicate with certain manipulation. And people are trying to understand why we see this object-based benefit in some designs, but not in the other design. So here I'm going to introduce one study that's studying object-based attention. I found a very interesting behavioral phenomenon when they introduce spatial uncertainty or spatial certainty into the paradigm. So in this study by Drummond and Shomstein in 2010, they use this two rectangle paradigm with the cue on one side and then searching for a target. And they introduced a certainty of the cue by like controlling the cue so that the cue can predict the subsequent target location. So in this case, they introduce a color cue. So if the cue is like a blue cue, then it's 100% valid. So when they see a blue, they know that it's the same location. When they see a red cue, then the target is not on the cued location, but it's always one location clockwise to the red cue. So it's 100%. So people can pick up the regularity. They can use that information to predict the target location, subsequent target location. So it will be, say, cued here, then the target will be here. And the finding is that when this cue can predict the subsequent target location for 100% of the time, then they didn't find an object-based benefit. So along the axis is the condition, so different object conditions, same object condition, and the y-axis is the reaction time. And as you can see, there's no significant difference between DO and SO. Whereas if they introduce back the uncertainty, if they make that now the red cue will predict either a clockwise or a counterclockwise shift of the location of the target with like a 50-50 chance, then the object-based benefit is back. So now the reaction time for same object is shorter than the reaction time for different object. So comparing these two conditions, it seems that when there is spatial certainty when there seems to be like a explicit or a clear strategy for participants to rely on. The object-based effect of attention somehow goes away, whereas if there's no clear no clear regularities of this uncertainty, then the object-based effect is back. So then, based on the findings of this behavior study, and this is their conclusion in that study, that it seems that object representation will guide attentional selection only in the absence of an alternative strategy, which in this case here is the spatial certainty of the target. And based on the conclusion of this study, we're trying to see if reversely, does the spatial certainty of the target influence object representation itself? So not bounded to like the rectangle, the boundary of the object, but if we introduce the object identities or object representation itself, does the spatial certainty influence that? And then later on, subsequently influence the the object based guidance of attention. So here I want to note that by object representation, I'm referring to a broader definition. So it might be defined as the object identity. It might be referring to the features that defines the object, like the colors or the shapes, the contours, the lower level features, or it might be even higher level, the semantics related to the object identity. So for the current stage, I'm not particularly separating the difference between the levels or the levels of the information related to the object, but just talking about object representation here as a more general or broader term, as something that's like some information that's covering the placeholder held by spatial attention. Okay, so if that makes sense, then this is my question, and then I want to measure object representation by measuring the neural representations of objects under different levels of certainty, and then I'm using the multivariate pattern analysis decoding for this dataset, and then I'll introduce the methods with more details later. Okay, so a design of our experiment. So this is fairly simple. We show the participants an object, a real-world object, in the center of the screen, and then the object is actually pretty big. It's 9 degrees of visual angle in height, and the width is about 2 to 4 degrees of visual angle. And participants see the object itself for a certain amount of time. They were not instructed to do anything about the object. They were not even explicitly told to process or attend to the object. And later on, at a certain time point in the trial, there will be 3 Gabor patches on the screen. Well, 3 patches. 2 of them are Gabor. So you will see a center Gabor patch that's very small at the center to try to keep the fixation at the center. And there will be another Gabor at one side of the object, either top location or bottom location. And another one will be a checkerboard that's neutral in their orientation. And then participants' task is to compare the orientation of the center Gabor and the side Gabor, and then responds with like a same orientation or different orientation. So the task is orthogonal to our manipulation that I will introduce later. But these Gabor patches will be on for a very short amount of time, about 250 milliseconds, and then everything will be taken off of the screen with only fixation left on, and participants will make a response during this time. And then the trial repeats. And then participants performed 4 runs for each session, and then they will participate in 2 sessions on 2 separate days. Okay, and here is a list of all the objects that we use as the background object. So there are a total 24 real-life objects. They are all oriented in a roughly vertical dimension, and then they varied in their size, in their actual size, in their color, texture, shape, contour. So we want to make this the stimulus set as variable as possible, because at this stage, as I said, we are not really controlling for visual features, and we take visual features that define the objects as one factor in the stimuli. Okay, so the important manipulation for our conditions. So we set up the tasks so that the side patch, the side gabor patch, could appear on the top or bottom location. And depending on the probability, we can set up the runs to be uncertain task, which means that the side gabor appears on top or bottom of the object with equal probability, or a certain run where the side gabor appears on the top or bottom of the object more likely 75% of the time. So it's not 100%, but just more likely than 75. And this manipulation is explicit to subjects. So subjects were told at the beginning of each run what condition it is. So they know that where the side gabor or side target could appear, and that they can voluntarily use that information to help with their task. And we hope that by introducing this explicit instruction to them, they can actively use the strategy and then allocate their attention based on the spatial certainty information that they get. So we don't necessarily introduce we are not putting the learning stage here. So they are aware at the beginning of each run. And our hypothesis, based on the behavior findings previously, is that when the target location is uncertain, then we hypothesize that the decoding result of the object identity should be better than the certain condition in object processing brain regions. Okay. Here are some details about the scanning protocol as well as the pre-processing. So for those of you interested, so we are using a spatial resolution of 2 by 2 by 2 for the functional runs, TR equals 2 seconds. And then we use spatial smoothing for the localizers only, and then all the MEPA analysis are used with are performed with data that's not smooth. Okay, again, I cannot really see the audience, so I don't know whether you have any questions at this stage, but if not, I can move on. Okay, so talking about the localizers. So we are interested in regions that are related with any processing during this task. So of course, we will want to see regions related with visual processing. So we define the visual areas with this localizer. This is a flickering checkerboard along the meridians, either the horizontal or vertical meridians. And then we just do a contrast to get the boundaries for V1, V2, V3, V4, bilateral, and then both dorsal and ventral. Well, V4 is only on ventral. And then we later perform decoding in V1 through V4 separately, and average the decoding accuracy to get a final result for early visual cortex. And we also localized the regions related with spatial attention. So this is mostly acting as a control, because we were thinking that in say IPS, intraparietal sulcus, in these regions, they do not really process much of the object identity. So we think that we would take them in as a control region. And then the task we use to localize IPS is this spatial attention task, where participants are required to attend to the 2 circles with moving dots. So they're doing a moving dot direction task, and they are attending to either these 2 locations or these 2 locations on the diagonal. And by, again, doing a contrast, we will get the boundary for IPS 0 and IPS 1, and then the decoding results will be averaged to form a final result for IPS. And finally, we also use the separate localizer for object processing. So this is a one-back task. So participants will see an array of object images or scrambled images, and by contrasting the brain activities of the intact images versus the scrambled images, we are able to get the object-related areas, including lateral occipital lobe and posterior fusiform, lateral occipital cortex and posterior fusiform sulcus. And for people who are more into the neuroanatomy field, I know that PFS is, some people argue that PFS is not a real anatomical region. It's more the sulcus around the fusiform gyrus, or some people will call it mid fusiform sulcus or something like that. But I'm not getting into the naming of this region for this, so I'm just using the functional definition of this and just use PFS for the naming for convenience here. All right, so again, all the left and right hemispheres are pulled together for visual for IPS and for the object-related regions. All right, and some more methods about MVPA decoding. So we are using a linear decoding, the support vector machine for decoding the labels or the object identities. And then I use the figure here from this Norman et al. Paper, where we are actually doing a similar type of analysis here. So initially we have the labels of object identity, of like 24 object identities that we use, and then we extract the voxel-wise activity for each condition, for each object, for each trial, for each voxels in the RIs. And we get those data and separate them into training set and testing set. So for training set, we have the labels, we have each of the response in each voxel for run 1, run 2, and go on. And we take those training set, we put those training set into a decoder, a linear decoder, to train the classifier. And then we then use the testing data. Sorry, my mouse is missing. I'm using testing data to put the voxel data, put the brain data into the classifier, and then let the classifier predict what label it spits out. And then we take the accuracy, right, for the decoding, and that accuracy is then used to measure or to assess how much representation, or how well, or how much of that information is represented in the brain. So that's the general idea of MVPA decoding that I'm using here, and some more details for those who are interested. We are using the data that we feed into the classifier is the single trial beta estimates from the Mumford method. And the decoder that we use is the linear support vector machine from the LIBS VM on MATLAB. And the labels, so important things here, the labels that we are decoding are the 24 object identities. So previously, when you look at the 24 objects that I put on the screen, you can see that there's not a very clear categories organization in the data set. So we are not really capturing any category effect. All of them are just pure identities. So each of them is different. And I'm splitting the training and testing data by runs. So we have 8 runs total for each subject. 4 runs will be uncertain runs, and the 4 runs will be certain runs separately. And for each of the group, we take 1 run for testing and the 3 of the runs for training. So this will be a leave 1 run out cross-validation for uncertain and certain cases separately. And for each iteration of this cross-validation, we select the top 50%, so top half of the voxels with the lowest p-value in the ANOVA across all 24 object identities to pick the voxels with the most responses or response differences among different conditions to get to help to decrease the noise in our data set. And so as we have 24 labels, 24 identities, the chance level here is 4.17 or 4.2%. And then I'll mark that in the result as well to show you. And finally, exciting to get into our result part. So this project, as I said, is still under data collection. We currently have 6 subjects, and our goal, which is pre-registered already, is 20 subjects. And here's the data from the current 6 subjects. If we plot out the data from early visual cortex, and here the y-axis is the decoding accuracy by percent, and the black dashed line is the chance level of the 4.2%, as I just described. As you can see, is that first, for both uncertain runs, which is the blue bar, and the certain runs, which is the orange bar, is above the chance level, which means that we can decode object identity in early visual cortex. And also, we find that this decoding accuracy is higher indeed in uncertain runs compared to certain runs, which means that indicates that the object information, object identity information is more represented in uncertain runs when there's no spatial certainty, and when there is spatial certainty, then we process or represent the object identity less in early visual cortex. And in IPS, where the intraparietal sulcus, where spatial attention is more involved than object identity, as you can see here, that the decoding results is close to chance level. And now, when we're looking at the 2 object-related processing areas, things becomes interesting and somehow puzzling. Is that we don't see a large decoding accuracy that's well above chance. We don't see that, and based on the numerical trend, at least in the LOC, it seems that the data pattern is going in the direction that we predict. But again, even if in the uncertain case, it's just slightly, probably 1% above the chance level. And it's even more puzzling in the ventral area in the PFS, where it's all around the chance level. And then with the current data set, I don't have enough power to tell whether this is a reverse, whether there's an interaction between those two. I cannot really tell, but all I can say for now is that for the object-related regions for these two, it seems that the decoding becomes noisier and not as clear or as strong as in early visual cortex. So as I said, we only have 6 subjects. So instead of error bars or statistics, I think it actually might be better for me to show you the individual data. So here next, I'm going to plot out the decoding accuracy for each subject, which is represented by each of the 6 lines, in the uncertain compared to the certain case. So again, y-axis is the decoding accuracy, dotted line is the chance level, and in early visual cortex, as you can see, it is pretty reliable for every subject that their decoding performance is above chance, and then there's a higher decoding performance in uncertain compared to certain case. So this pattern is pretty reliable across the 6 subjects, at least, that we currently collected. And if we get into LOC, then everything becomes squished towards the chance level, and you can still see the pattern of this decoding higher in uncertain compared to certain, but again, everything is decreased and getting closer to chance. And even if at the end, even if with the full data set, there's a significant above chance decoding for LOC, it's still very small. That it might be like less than or equal to 1% difference, and that's, we consider that's like really, compared to EVC and compared to what we know about LOC and the previous literature, it seems a pretty small effect. And again, things become pretty noisy in PFS. That's it, even harder to interpret it at this stage. So this is the individual data set, individual data of different RIs. And then at this stage, we're really puzzling about the object-related regions, because we initially included these regions into our analysis with the hypothesis that, okay, here, these regions should be the main regions dealing with this information. So what happens to those regions in our study? And when we try to look back and try to figure out what's unique or what's the critical thing in our design that might be related with this, we find that in our design, the objects are task irrelevant. And it's, to be more specifically, the subjects are not explicitly encouraged to attend to the object. And this aligns with the usual design for object-based attention in the behavioral paradigms, because in, say, starting from the Eagley paradigm, participants' task was to, detect the target or do some discrimination about the target, and they were not explicitly instructed to do anything about the rectangles. So the rectangles here are indeed task irrelevant. And if we look back at the literature studying LC or object-related regions, a lot of them actually require participants to attend or process the object stimuli to a certain degree. So I'm also doing a literature review, trying to gather what people have done for this. And here are just some examples, not a full list, of course. So some people are doing, or a lot of the papers actually doing one back task on object identity, whether it's a repeat object. One paper is doing the same object with whether it's the same viewpoint or different viewpoint, but still some level of object processing is involved. Some papers are doing a discrimination test about the colors of the object, or the color matching test for fixation, cross, and stimuli. And they, in those papers, usually they will put that as a method trying to tell the participants to pay attention to process the objects to some degree, and then not like take them as a full, like the main task to about their identity. And that's kind of like some manipulation in the middle about the object identity. But what we are doing with our current design is totally task irrelevant. So they are doing the Gabor matching task. They were not encouraged to attend to the background objects. We don't mention the background objects to them. And also, it's a pretty fast task, so they need to really pay attention to the Gabors, and that's a pretty demanding task. That they actually don't have a lot of spare resources to pay to put on objects. So we were thinking that comparing these factors, we're thinking that if this is the case, that this completely independent task actually lowers the decoding sensitivity of the MRI data in these object-related regions. And this might go along with other factors. For example, we are decoding 24 object identities, and then a lot of the existing studies, especially in the earlier years, like starting from the Haxby paper, that is doing more on the category level, which is, of course, a stronger effect for category than exemplars or than like independent or individual identities. So we think that that might be one reason for a lower decoding accuracy, or not able to decode the object identity at all. And here we don't have a final conclusion for this, and I'm happy to hear about any thoughts on this. If you are aware of any papers doing independent tasks and trying to decode object identity or other related studies, I'm happy to discuss and then to include them and compare and see what's actually going on with our data set. But putting that aside, so let's put the noisier LC and PFS data set. Just look at the artificial cortex results. So it's pretty, at least for the 6 subjects that we have, it's pretty reliable that the spatial certainty influences the decoding accuracy of object identities. And when it's uncertain, we have a higher decoding accuracy or a better representation or higher representation of object identities. And this result direction aligns with the behavior finding that spatial certainty, the spatial certainty influenced the object-based attention in this 2010 behavioral experiment. Oops. Sorry, okay, here. And we think that this, if that's the case, if our final data set, if in the final data set we are still able to find this result, then this might be a neural mechanism to explain this behavior phenomena and the neural mechanism under the interactions between spatial attention and object representations. And now, if we reconsider the directions that this theory or this behavior phenomenon would predict, it's quite interesting because this result pattern, it seems that it goes counter to the predictions of the binding theory of attention. So if you are more familiar with the binding theories of attention, it's basically focusing on the function of attention as a mechanism to connect the space and the object or the features and bond them together for a more consistent or coherent processing. And this theory, this binding theory of attention, would predict that spatial location should benefit, or a more certain spatial location should benefit object processing. Whereas the behavior phenomenon in 2010, as well as our current data, seems to go the opposite way. So another example about theory, binding theory of attention that I want to bring up here is the phenomenon that Julie found and have been like replicated with a lot of manipulations in her lab. It's called the spatial congruency bias. So this is a paradigm showing with two like sequential objects in same or different locations. So participants see an object at one location, and then they see another object at the same location or different location, and then their task is to judge whether they have the same identity, the object have the same identity. And the finding is that when the two objects appear at the same location sequentially, participants are biased to judge, to make a decision saying that, oh, these two objects are the same identity. So their perception or attention is related, is kind of like bound to a specific spatial location in this way. And this is, as I said, this is one example of showing the binding theories of attention, and which simply is a different direction as well. This theory or the object-based attention would predict a different direction. And comparing these two, we were thinking that okay, it really might be some critical factor here that might be related with task relevancy again. So in this task, participants are doing the same different identity tasks, so they need to really process the object identity. And then I know that some of you are doing using similar paradigm or using other paradigms related with binding, might ask the participants to process the color, or orientation, or some factors or some perspective of the object, and that's also kind of like a task relevant design. And whereas in the current in this part of the study that I'm talking about, we focus here on more of the task irrelevant, so including the object-based paradigm, including the fMRI studies that I just described. So is it because of the task relevancy that goes with two separate theories now predicting the opposite directions? And if that's the case, then that would be really interesting, because this will show that actually task relevancy is more important or have larger influence than we originally thought, that it might actually change what mechanisms we decide to use for the interaction between, or for how we coordinate space and objects. And this actually indicates that we might have a more flexible or more dynamic attentional system that's actually more, I don't know whether voluntary is the word I'm looking for, but this is something that we can actively change depending on what our task requires. So if our task requires, say, to process the object-related information, then we rely more on the spatial location to bond them together. Whereas if we are focusing on, if we're doing something else, doing about the location, then for the irrelevant object case, then we might process the object based on the need, right? If I have a strategy, I don't use it. If I don't have a clear strategy, I might process the object information just in case as a heuristic or something like that. So this is something, is the direction that I want to test, is something that is quite interesting with this current data set. And I later on, I will collect more data and then try to see whether that's the case and try to also link to the existing findings in the field and trying to see how that can put together to form our flexible and dynamic attentional cognitive system, trying to deal with or adapt with the fast changing world. Okay, so that's all I have for my presentation for my project. This is not a conclusion. I know we're still working on this. And then finally, I would like to thank my PI, Xiaoli Zhang, and then AJ Collegio, who was working on a pilot study of this project, of this MRI project, and then the Attention and Cognition Lab, and then the Finding Agency, and also just to slip in an advertisement here. So the OPAM, the Object Perception, Attention, and Memory Conference, is happening in November 17th in Boston, right before Psychnomics. So stay tuned for the news on that. And then thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Xiaoli. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. So are there any questions from the audience here or on Zoom? Feel free to speak up. Jin has a question. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for the talk.
Thank
so
you.
I have one question. I'm not entirely sure it makes sense, but to what extent you think the effect you observe is a more, doesn't sound right, to a more general attention effect? Like for example, I was looking at the task, and I feel when the condition is uncertain, I'm using more effort just to do that task. And the effort itself, though, like in my own experience, like research, so the effort itself can moderate the whole ventral temporal cortex. So yeah, that's my first question. And then kind of related to that, I feel in your paradigm, the participants, when it's the certain condition, participants can only just focus on that specific part. They are not actually looking at, or like you said, process the object. So in that sense, I think it's still the lower attention load. Yeah.
Okay. I see. That's a great question. And then first about the effort. So this is definitely something that should be taken into account. But actually considering effort, it might predict the other direction, because for say uncertain compared to certain case, when it is uncertain, participants don't know where the location is coming up, and then they will need more effort to perform the task. And in this case, more resources will be put into just searching and performing the task, and less about object processing. And then in this way,
they will force to focus on the whole object. So then they will force to
so that's
the object more.
Yes, so that's the second part. So let me finish the first part about effort. So because effort itself definitely will predict as the opposite direction, that if that's only effort, then putting getting more effort into the task will definitely lower the object processing, and then thus will have a worse decoding performance. And that's not what we see in the data pattern, at least with this preliminary data. And that's your first question about effort. And for the second question is about basically coverage, or like the span of attention, whether they can attend, whether they will attend the whole object, or they are paying attention to part of the object. This is something that for the current design, it definitely lies with the current design of our certainty manipulation. So we cannot really tease that apart with this current design. One thing we can do is that if we take two separate objects, one at bottom, one on top, and then looking at the identity, separating them, then we are able to see whether this is like a whole versus a part thing. But currently with this design, we want to put the object in the center first, just to get a more signal for the object related regions to pick up the objects. And also even if with the explanation of the attentional span, it can also it's also one way of explaining how the spatial attention is intertwined, is related with processing of the objects. So I don't think that that will completely change our goal of the study, because we're still trying to understand the interaction between them in this task irrelevant case. But that will definitely frame our study further into like future experiments of multiple objects. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And one more quick question is actually related to what you say, multiple object. So here the uncertainty is solely induced by the effectiveness of the cue. So what do you think? Is the uncertainty also similar to like unexpected, because we know that object representation will be affected by the context they present in, and the study find that if you present an invalid context, which is unexpected, object representation will be affected. So yeah, I just wondering that. I don't know how exactly we want to test that, but just in your experiment or in your design, do you equal uncertainty with unexpected?
That's a great question. That's something that we haven't explicitly teased that apart. And then I actually think that the unexpected will actually go with the certain more than the uncertain, because for the uncertain is 50-50. It's actually not that rare for each instance to appear. On the other hand, for the certain case, well, 75 is the more common one. Well, you can say that the 25 is the unexpected one, right? So then so for the current design, at least, we cannot really tease that apart, whether that's audible effect for unexpected or a certainty effect. But that's definitely something that we can look into our interpretation later. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. You have questions, Yitan?
I have a minor question about how many trails you have for each category or each identity.
Each item. Okay, so we have 4 trials for each object in each run. So we have, say, 24 objects. We have 4 times 4. So say in uncertain runs, we have 16 trials for each object.
And you do the decoding with 3 rounds to train and 1 rounds for task.
Yes.
So for each identity, you only have like 12 trails. But do you think the result is because the classification is not sensitive to so many classes?
So one, actually, I was thinking that you would ask about the number of runs. So one thing, so let me get to the number of objects first. So definitely, this is a lot of objects compared to like the previous studies about like either 3 or 4 or 5 categories, or within category about like 3 exemplars or something. But there are studies already showing that people can, or not people, but the brain can show different patterns for like 20 plus object identities. And then I think this is.
And in that study, they also just have like 12 trails per identity.
Yes. So in this one, in the Kravitz 2010 one, they have 24 different line drawings, and then they are showing in like different positions or anything. And they used a similar amount of runs or data set as us. So, and another thing that I want to mention, kind of like a backup for that, is that I did try to put all the runs together, because I have like 4 runs for certain, 4 runs for uncertain.
Uncertainty and certainty.
Yep. Yeah, so I use all 8 runs. I train on 7 runs, test on 1 run, so I'm not really separating uncertain, certain. And then I definitely find a better decoding in the artificial cortex, but in the object-related regions, it's still around say 4% and 5%. So it's really not the number of runs that's that's really
So, but for your task, it's related to orientation, so it's like a low-level feature task.
Yes.
And do you think even the subject encodes the object, but they only encodes the low-level features of the object? So that's the reason why we can only find the results in visual cortex.
That's interesting point. Yes. So we did not use a more higher level task, because we don't want to trigger or want to like, I don't know, encourage or kind of like put like object identity as something that's intertwined with this. So we want the task to be, really orthogonal. That's why we use this lower level task. And for whether this lower level task will trigger participants to, or trigger the brain to process in a more lower level way compared to the higher level, mid level of identity. For that, I'll need to go back and see what the literature has done for this, because at least in my impression, most of the literatures studying object related regions showing that these regions might process the object identity as a more consistent, or I don't know. It's also because that they are actually doing tasks related with the object. Though they do.
Looks like,
Yeah. For example, one bag test on identity is definitely identity, but there are also tests on colors, which is kind of lower level, but still might be related with identity, or might probe some level of identity processing. So that's hard to tell, and then that's where at this stage, I was talking with Sarah about this, that we need to go back and really look at the literatures to see what people have done before, pointing out that LC is doing something different.
Yeah, I just wonder whether the subject has already formed the information to the category or not.
Yeah, it might be that they're tuned to lower level, but that's an interesting idea that we will take into. Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you, Xiaoli. Any other questions here on Zoom? Okay, I have one final one. So you're talking about how the difficulty within your task about the object is completely irrelevant, and that could be harming the decoding in things like LOC. And as you showed, like in the previous studies where they have the simple line drawings, the objects there, you could say they're irrelevant, but I would argue that the cues that they're using do make the objects more relevant, because they are cueing a part of the object. So therefore, if you're cueing a part, one end of a rectangle, that now makes you pressing the rectangle. And so I'm wondering, in an effort to, try and make your objects a little bit more relevant to the task, so that they're actually paying attention to their identities, an idea like perhaps telling participants that at the end of either the experiment or the run, they're going to be asked to identify old versus new objects. And so then in that way, they are encouraged still during the task itself. The object is irrelevant, but overall, it is important that they are encoding the identity so that they can, do well on the old versus new tasks. I wonder if that could be a possibility to get you better decoding in things like LOC.
Yeah. Because current thing is that first we want to know that if the lower decoding LOC is because we are doing something wrong, or if there's some factors that's not what we are interested, that's confounded with the current design. But if really that's the task relevance that's taken into the part of the LOC, then that's a whole different issue or whole different topic. Not issue actually, whole different topic. That's quite interesting to study by itself. That if the LOC representation is really moderated by task relevance, and that actually could, as I was explaining in the earlier question, that actually could change our understanding as a field to the function of LOCs so far, because at least in so far nobody has mentioned or emphasized task relevance in LOC, right? So then that's a whole different topic to study if we are really sure that, okay, it's not something else, it's really the task relevance. And I will probably build a grant on top of that.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Xiaoli, for presenting. Let's one more round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. It's
It was
really
great
nice
to see you
to
again.
have everyone. All right, great to see you.